Welcome to another symphonic review here at the college. We're thrilled to have you, and we're glad that you found the alternative venue today. So, we'll be in here today. The next symphonic preview will be back in Heritage Hall in a month or so. So, welcome. Enjoy yourselves. Here's Grace.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. The program for this Saturday is, I thought of it as sort of warm summer music for a cold winter day. Apparently the weather's supposed to get a lot better by the weekend, so it'd be less appropriate than it would have been today, but I still think it'll be a good time. We'll have some really music with lots of sunshine in it. Our soloist, as many of you may know, is Mary Papoulis, our usual concert master, playing the Lava Symphony Española, French piece based on Spanish traditional folk music. It has a lot of the same rhythms as Spanish music. I invited her to come. She bailed. She said she had to practice. But I know she's really looking forward to it, and she's looking forward to sort of stepping out of her usual role. And one of the things she keeps saying is that she's been supported so much for the last 30 years that she's been here that she considers it a kind of gift that she can give back to share herself in a different way. So we're really looking forward to that one. We are playing Beethoven, and you can't go more than 90 seconds without talking about Beethoven in a classical music context. So we're going to make sure that we do a lot of that today, and talk a little bit about why we talk about Beethoven so much in the first place. Quick and dirty biographies. Born in 1770 in Bonn, which is sort of northwestern Germany near the Dutch border. His family is ancestrally Dutch. He is, like most prominent musicians, one of a long line of musicians in his family. His father and his grandfather were both leading town musicians. His grandfather was his father, and he was just doing the family business in that regard. In 1792, Haydn, who had been working for many, many years in his court in Hungary, but was finally freed because his new count didn't like music that much. So he was free to go all over Europe and make ridiculous amounts of money writing symphonies that were extremely popular. One of the most famous human beings in all of Europe at this time. But if you look at the geography, Vienna, where Haydn lives, London, where Haydn was making a ton of money, Bonn is actually sort of right in the middle. So when he's making his trips, he actually comes through Bonn, meets Beethoven, and they talk, and Haydn says, "Why don't you come down and study with me?" This is, and so Beethoven does. This is 1792. Moves to Vienna, where he would live the rest of his life. The partnership between Haydn and Beethoven didn't go well. The conventional wisdom says that Beethoven was just too wild and too revolutionary for some old fogey like Haydn. More likely, it's probably something like Haydn was a composer and sort of a nice guy and just sort of not rigorous enough to be that kind of taskmaster teacher that Beethoven actually kind of wanted. He wanted someone to kind of fight with and really give him, trouble and really correct his mistakes and things like that. And Haydn just sort of didn't have that temperament. However, nonetheless, moving to Vienna is a really big deal for Beethoven. He becomes one of the most famous musicians in town, mostly as a pianist. He's a really, really good piano player and really good improviser. And again, Vienna would be his home base for the rest of his life. Now, this doesn't tell you why he would be necessarily revolutionary. A few things go into that. One is that the world is in a very strange, difficult place at that time, and everybody's life is changing. The basic tenets of society are changing. 1789 is when the French Revolution happens, and this idea that there are a group of people who are literally divinely ordained to tell everybody else what to do is suddenly not so in vogue. And so the liberty, fraternity, equality thing is taking hold. However, many of the thinkers who are really into this and really like this, the intellectuals of the day, also notice that after the French Revolution happened, there's a giant massacre. They call it the Reign of Terror, and they execute people and things like that. And so you get these people who are really conflicted about what society should be. They really like the idea of self-government and equality and things like that, but they want to do it in a way that doesn't result in bloodbath. And one of these people is Friedrich Schiller. And Schiller, with regards to Beethoven, is most famous as being the guy who wrote the words for Ode to Joy. That's a poem that Beethoven really liked and that he would adapt into the Ninth Symphony. He also wrote some other words, which tells us a lot about Beethoven's mentality. So in 1795, so Beethoven would have been 25, he had just moved to Vienna at this time, and Schiller is thinking to himself, okay, equality and all that's really good, but somehow it's not working out the way we want to. So how can we connect these things together? How can we have this revolution and also a peaceful society? And he comes to the conclusion that for a long time it was really necessary to have these tyrannical dictatorship, whatever it is, to have these strong people lead everybody else because people were they weren't rational enough. They were just stuck in their day-to-day lives. He calls them sensual man. And so they weren't ready to lead themselves, to come up with their own laws and things like that. And so in this move to becoming rational man, this group of people who can come up with their own laws, it's a really good idea, but we're not ready. We can't get from this kind of person to that kind of government, which is why everything's falling apart. And so he asked himself, how can we do that? How can we get from that kind of person? How can we lead that person to being able to self-govern? And his answer is art. And so he actually puts up a very a strong directive. If you're going to be an artist, this is what you need to do. And so I'll read you a little bit of what Schiller says an artist should be. No doubt the artist is the child of his time, but woe to him if he is also its disciple or even its favorite. When he has become a man, let him return to his century as an alien figure, not in order to gladden it by his appearance, rather terrible like Agamemnon's son, to cleanse it. He will indeed take his subject matter from the present age, but his form he will borrow from a nobler time, nay, from beyond all time, from the absolute unchangeable unity of his being. Here, from the pure ether of his demonic nature, flows forth the wellspring of beauty, untainted by the corruption of the generations and ages, which wallow in the dark eddies below it. But how does the artist secure himself against the corruptions of his time, which everywhere encircle him? By disdaining its opinion. Let it look upwards to his own dignity and to law, not downwards to fortune and to everyday needs. Live with your century, but do not be its creature. Render to your contemporaries what they need, not what they praise. So Beethoven, when he moves to Vienna, right this time when this is being written, is doing probably the most popular and easiest to praise thing that you can possibly do as a Viennese musician. Again, he's this virtuoso pianist stuff. This is what people are eating up, right? Whether by temperament or by circumstance, he's going to shift gears very dramatically. That circumstance being, of course, that he realizes around 1800 that he's going deaf. And so he's no longer going to be able to be this performing musician. He sort of sticks with it for a while into the sort of early 1810s or so. But it's becoming harder and harder for him to take the stage. So if you're not going to be a popular musician, which is not an option to him anymore, he can decide. It's an easier decision for him to make to be this revolutionary, to be this guy outside of time, to try and lead his other people to new places by writing music they've never heard before. And frankly, he's very successful at it. Everybody sort of can't get enough of him as this revolutionary figure. Every composer for the next 100 years is going to be talking about Beethoven all the time. I forget if I said this already, but I always compare it to sort of original sin. Before Beethoven comes along, everybody's doing what they're doing, and they're enjoying themselves and they're writing the music they want to write. After Beethoven comes along, everybody has to think really hard about the way they write music. They have to pick sides. They have to have philosophies. They have to study old people. It's not that that didn't happen before, but once you get past Beethoven, everybody starts looking at Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn, and Bach for models because they sort of forget how to write music. They need these ideas. They need to take things from other composers in a way that previous musicians didn't have to do quite so obviously. So in 1808, this is sort of nearing the end, but not quite, of Beethoven's as a prominent performer in Vienna. He decides to put on a concert for his own benefit. It's a concert where he's going to make some money. And there's a very famous concert. We actually talked about it a few times. We talked about it at our opera show last November. Does anybody remember why? Even though there was no Beethoven on that concert, but we talked about this concert anyway. It's the supreme factoid. This concert, 1808, December 22nd.
It was very long.
Well, it was very long. That's not why we brought it up.
It was cold.
It was cold. It was exactly 50 years before Puccini's birth, to the day. Puccini was born in 1858 on December 22nd. Completely useless information, but it's just a But, and it's, this was before Beethoven would be quite the figure that he would become later. In 1824, at the premiere of the Ninth Symphony, that's like Europe-wide news. People send correspondents from far away to come see this new Ninth Symphony by Beethoven. 1808, they have to work a little bit harder. He has to book all his musicians and find a venue. And all the musicians are booked because it's Christmas time, and to this day, Christmas is a busy time for musicians. But he manages to pull it off. What people don't realize in advance is that it's going to be one of the most important concerts in history, mostly because the Fifth Symphony is going to be his premiere there, the Sixth Symphony is going to be his premiere there, the Fourth Piano Concerto, and the Choral Fantasy, which we did last year, which is another reason why we've talked about this 1808 concert now, the third time in 2 years, was also premiered at that concert as well. He also improvised and did a few things that he'd already written as well. So in 1808, they're premiering the Fifth Symphony and the Sixth Symphony. Again, this is a concert that Beethoven just puts on, again, to sort of advertise himself. And if we're talking about Beethoven as a revolutionary person, I think it's interesting to talk about how this piece might fall into that. What's different about the Sixth Symphony from the way other people wrote symphonies before it? And there are a few things that stick out immediately. The main one is that all the movements get titles. Beethoven had never done that before. You get a little bit of that in the 18th century from Haydn and things like that. But this subtitle thing, Awakening of Cheerful Feelings Upon the Arrival in the Country, is more specific information than you can get from a lot of people. Now, how is that revolutionary? What does that have to do with, say, the 19th century that's different from the 18th century? You can think of each of these as being like a miniature character piece, which is a very common, prominent thing for these 19th century composers to do. So if you're Schumann, yeah, you write symphonies and you write quartets and stuff like that. But you're going to write a ton of piano pieces with fun names like Scenes from Childhood. If you're Schubert, you're going to write 600 songs, which are a little bit different since they have voice, but they're the same kind of thing. They're these smallish pieces that have these specific characters to them. It's a very different, those things didn't really, those genres didn't exist in the 18th century, in the Mozart, Haydn, Bach time. And so this is very much a forward-looking thing. This is a relatively new phenomenon to give your pieces this kind of subtitle. So the other thing that we'll listen in just a bit that makes this, what's kind of cool is to compare it to the Fifth Symphony. Again, these were written about, like, on top of each other, premiered at the same concert, and they could hardly be more different in terms of just about everything. They're very minor things in common, which go in completely different directions. So if you think about the Fifth Symphony, right, this is the one that everybody knows. If you were to, say, give an adjective to the first movement, what might you choose? Grand? Anything else? Dramatic, sure. Is it happy or sad?
Warlike.
Warlike. Okay, that's good. Okay, none of those things apply to the Sixth Symphony. You can't use any of those words. This is not grand. This opening that you're going to hear is not, it doesn't grab you by the throat. Warlike, you couldn't even get close to warlike in this movement if you tried. dramatic is sort of the opposite of dramatic. You know, one of the things about the Fifth Symphony is that you take this little cell, right, you go, build and build and build and build and build. You get these sort of driving upward momentum lines that come out of this. In this thing, you also get little fragments of tunes, and they don't drive. They repeat. They just sort of enjoy their existence. And so if the Fifth Symphony is very much a directed piece, Sixth Symphony is more like sort of relaxing in your warm bath. So one of the things that's kind of cool is that does have in common with the Fifth Symphony is that they each start with a very short thing that has a fermata. And then you start the music. And this one you get. And then you start the music. Again, the same kind of technique, completely opposite emotional affect. Already, so you already see how Fifth Symphony, Sixth Symphony are two different worlds. You know, it's amazing that you can even write them at the same time. What you're about to hear, again, this idea with the Fifth Symphony where you take a motive and repeat it, and it drives, goes forward, forward, forward. We are going to get a motive and it repeats. It does not go forward, forward, forward. It just sits. You're going to hear the same measure 9 times in a row. It'll crescendo, but then it'll diminish. We're going to get another kind of repeated cell here where we get the same melody sort of cascading over and over and over again. This one does crescendo, but it doesn't really change this part. Hard-pressed to write music that's more happy with its existence than the first movement of the symphony. This is the repeat of the opening section, and one thing I'm going to ask you to listen for is another thing that gives it a sense of sameness, of being in the same place, are these drones in the bass part, where you just hear this forever and ever and ever, even as the stuff around it keeps going. Partly that's to give it a rustic feel, but again, it gives it a very grounded feel, like we're not trying to get to a different place. So right here, we're going to hear this low F, the cello. You're not going to leave that note for a long time. innocence that's very much part of the character piece nature of it. Also notice, it depends on what you count, but there are a grand total of about 4 bars in this piece, which are in a minor key. Everything is in major. Again, extreme contrast to the Fifth Symphony, which is mostly in minor. So we're going to go on to the middle part of this piece. We'll listen to a little bit of it before we go on. And the main thing I think, again, you'll notice is the fact that we have this kind of motive over and again, this, and then for a really exciting change. And you'll hear, so 12 bars of it in one key. And then it does change key, but it changes key in an interesting way. It's not through the usual modulations or blocking modulations. You'll be in one place, and then you'll just be in this completely new place. It's like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. So you're here, and then without any kind of anticipation or transition, you're just suddenly there. Or you're here, and without any preamble, you are. And it's a very a romantic thing to do. This, these kinds of chord movements. Schubert even went on a very similar way. And again, technically, I guess they're building, but it really feels like a more kind of stasis. We're really just enjoying where we are. So you'll hear them. So first we'll get 12 bars of just B flat major, starting here. Piano crescendo. Now suddenly 16 bars of D major. Look at that cellist do the same thing over and over again. Now we have that kind of repetition on the minuscule scale, just 1 bar at a time. Now we're going to get it on the large scale. Everything that just happened, we're going to do the exact same thing again, except instead of B flat to D, we're going to go with G to E. 12 bars of G. Now, 16 bars of E. Again, if you put these one section on top of the other section, they line up exactly the same. There's some small differences in orchestration of the phrase structure, the places where the keys change, everything identical. And again, what it gives you a sense of, I think, is that this is not music that's in a hurry to get anywhere. It's music that's enjoying where it already is. Going back to the idea of a character piece, let's talk a little bit about the second movement, which is called Seen by the Brook. Make sure I can find this here. And what we get in the second, third, and fourth movements are it's music that only makes sense if we think of it within the character piece. So that's going to be something that's very common post-Beethoven. People like Liszt and Wagner writing music that it only works if you know the story behind it. And the first obvious place where this happens is at the end of the second movement. So this starts with, you can hear the brook babbling. That's in the middle strings. This gentle undulating in the middle parts. Going through. We have at least one of our second violinists in the audience who can tell you that this goes on forever. You are constantly, this brook just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. As text fading, as river music, this isn't particularly revolutionary. This is something that would have made sense before. But one thing that you can, again, not justify solely on musical grounds is the end of this movement. Little trills that we have in here are going to, let's say, come into fruition when we get to the end. But Beethoven will actually write what kind of bird they're supposed to be into the score. hear the flute, who is the nightingale. And then the oboe and the clarinet are the quail and the cuckoo, and they're sort of on top of each other. There's no formal music reason to do that. You do that because you're sitting by the brook and the birds are singing. Now, even those bird call type things, you can maybe justify or consider having existed like in, say, spring, in the Vivaldi Four Seasons and things like that. Once we get to the third, fourth, and fifth movements is where things get beyond what anybody else has done. Notably, the fact that we have five movements to begin with, that's unprecedented, right? And actually doesn't really catch on. That's rare. Schumann writes a five-movement symphony later, Mahler writes a couple, Tchaikovsky writes one. But the point of why it has five movements is what's really interesting. In your typical symphony, you have the fast first part, you have the slow second part, you have the dancey third part, and you have the fast ending part, right? And so what happens in this symphony is that during the peasant dance, it is interrupted by a thunderstorm. And then we go back after the thunderstorm to being happy again. And when I say interrupted, it's literally interrupted. The movement doesn't finish. It doesn't even kind of finish. It's just you're enjoying your dance, and then suddenly rumbling thunder. There's nothing to soften that particular transition. So let's see if you can hear of that transition. Hopefully an ad won't interrupt it.
At DataCamp, we provide high-quality interactive courses from the world's best data science instructor.
These are our happy peasants dancing. Quietly revolutionary about this section. In the third movement of a symphony, you're supposed to be in three. You're supposed to be in triple meter. It's how everybody has always done it. But this music's in two. I think it's maybe the first time, maybe Haydn or something like that. It's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You never do that in the third movement of a symphony. So now we're going to finish up our dance, and then right in midstream, the cellos and basses are going to rumble in the distance. We don't get a cadence, we don't get a finishing up to anything, it's just suddenly thunder. We'll listen to this whole movement, it's not very long. But this in particular is the one that's the least classical, the least 18th century, the most 19th century, in that it only exists to tell the story, right? It shouldn't be there, right? It's an extra movement that's not supposed to be in the first place. But you hear lots of rumbling thunder, particularly in the basses and cellos. Basses hate this piece because it's so miserable to play. You're constantly going, it's like gymnastics up on your fingerboard there. But you get tons of, this is the first time you hear timpani, right? A lot of symphonies have timpani, but we've been saving it for the thunderstorm. The timpani's going to play this movement, not going to play the last movement there. It's only there to be thunder. We get what we call lightning. The first violins get a lot of this. That kind of figure, which is a flashing of lightning after the thunder. It's when we get our trombones for the first time. Trumpets played a little bit in the previous movement, but they're going to have a lot more to do here. It's the only time when we get piccolo. We're suddenly using this louder, edgier orchestra. And again, the nature of this movement, again, is that it only exists, it only works as part of this storytelling mechanism. Very much a romantic, not a classical thing to do. Raindrops. And the heavens open up. It's your first timpani note. Hear the low instruments. Lightning. That's miserable to play. More raindrops. Ready for the first trombone note in about a half an hour. A storm is going to leave us. With a few distant last gasps from our timpani player. Distant lightning. Now here's the thing. Theoretically, we've gone through this huge amount of drama. I'll pause it for a second. It seems like that ought to have taken us someplace, but it really doesn't. If you think of the Fifth Symphony, the opening, that very sort of angry, agitated thing, where do we end in the Fifth Symphony? People remember the last movement of that piece? It's this huge, heroic C major fanfare, this thing. It's this. In other words, there's a sense of you've gone from one place where you started, and then you progress, and there's this kind of reward at the end where you've been striving and you've achieved something, and now you've accomplished something or something. You've gone from one place to another. And this, so if you think of that piece, it sort of goes like this. This one rather goes like this. In that, even after all of that drama, we're going to find ourselves roughly back where we started. If you remember, the title of the first movement is Happy Feelings Upon Arriving in the Countryside. And the title of this one is Happy Feelings Upon the Passing of the Storm. We're still in the same key. We're in the same affect. It's a different groove. The last one's in 6/8, the first one's in 2/4. And there are some references to shepherd songs. So the first things that you'll hear are these little arpeggios that are designed to be like shepherd's horn kinds of sounds. But basically, it tells a very rounded story, bringing us back to where we started. Clarinet, first shepherd. Our horn. And then just like in the first one, we're going to just do a really nice contented melody. Mr. Thielemann is going to take an epically slow tempo. Pick it up here. That much. This movement's almost exclusively major. None of those angry chords that we got in the storm. Listen all the way to the end. I have a question for you. This is going to segue us into our Dvorak, which is our other orchestral piece on the concert. What genre of piece did Beethoven write more of than any other? So he wrote 9 symphonies. That's not the answer, I can assure you. Anything he wrote more than 9 of? Depends on what you count. There were 5 piano concertos, 1 violin concerto. 32 piano sonatas. I think that's probably second place. It's a very distant second. String quartets, not quite so many as piano sonatas. It's in the teens. I forget exactly how many, maybe 18 or something like that. Trios? Some of them, I guess, were technically trios. Beethoven wrote 179 folk song arrangements. Why would he do such a thing? And I think to answer that question is to answer a different question. Let's say you're hanging out in the 19th century, as people do, and you go to a concert or you go to an opera or something, or you go see a friend play or something, or you hear something, and you're like, wow, I really like this. I want to listen to it over and over again. What are you going to do? How are you going to accomplish that? Yeah, if you're really rich, you can hire someone to do that. But if you're sort of comfortably middle class, how are you going to, what are you going to do?
Play it yourself.
You're going to play it yourself, which means you need to do what? You need to learn to play, for one thing, and then if, if that's your favorite piece, where are you going to get your hands on it? Yeah, you're going to have to find the sheet music for it. Let's say today I go to a concert and I hear something I really like, and I want to listen to it all the time. What do I do? You get it on iTunes, you order the CD off Amazon or something like that. And I think what's interesting about that is that there were sheet music stores in the 19th century. There are still sheet music stores today, although most of that business is online now. But I think we'd make a mistake if we equated those two things, because they served actually very different functions. A sheet music service in the 19th century has much more in common with iTunes today in terms of why it existed and what it was used for. It was a way to get music into the home. It was a way, everybody wanted to listen to music whenever they could, right? I mean, that's normal humanity. How are you going to do that? You needed an actual human being who could play it, and you needed the sheet music for it. And so, if you were, say, a relatively well-to-do woman who was in charge of making your home a livable place and hosting parties and things like that, one of the skills you might learn was guitar or flute or piano or something like that. And there was never, of course, the expectation that you would do it as a pro, but you would learn it sort of for the same reasons that you would learn sewing or something. It's kind of a home ec kind of thing, right? This is a way to make your home a really great place. So a lot of women did become very accomplished musicians, again, if they weren't professionals. One of the ways you can see this is that their teachers would often write music for them, and they'd say, dedicated to Madam whomever. And some of them are really hard. And it's like, wow, Madam whomever must have been really good in order to actually play this piece. So if you're a publisher, if you say the equivalent to a record producer, you're trying to make a lot of money by selling all this sheet music. Again, the same way that a record company would make a lot of money by selling CDs. And so they're always looking for things that will sell, things that people can play at home. And so a Scottish publisher approached Beethoven and said, how about you write 1 million folk song settings for us? For a variety of different instrumentations, because not everybody plays the same instruments. So, some with voice and piano, some with voice and cello and piano, things like that. If you, for instance, write a really popular symphony, they're immediately going to come up with a double piano version, because not everybody can put an orchestra together, but you might be able to find two pianists relatively easily. That's the thing that's going to sell. Beethoven's first big hit as a composer, written around 1800, 1799, was a septet in E-flat. That piece would follow for the rest of his life. It was everybody's favorite Beethoven piece. But it existed in a ton of arrangements for sort of virtually any combination of instruments you could find. Again, so it could be played anywhere you could, by anybody who wanted to play it. You didn't have to get that group of 7 musicians together. So without recordings existing commercially until the 1900s, once we get to Dvorak today, Dvorak is born in 1841, that's still kind of the model. If you're going to make money off of music, it's to sell sheet music to people to use at home. So Dvorak was Czech, he grows up near Prague, manages to find a fan in Brahms, and Brahms tells his publisher, Simrock, hey, this guy's really good, have him write some music for you. And so Dvorak does that. He writes a set of 8 what he calls Slavonic dances for 2 pianos, or for 4-hand piano, I forget which it is. And they were huge hits. Again, these are things that people can take home with them and play at home. Part of it is because they're a little bit modeled off of Brahms' own Hungarian dances, which were written for the exact same purpose. These are arrangements that are going to make a ton of money. And this kind of national character thing is popular during the day. So he writes these 8 Slavonic dances, and these are still popular today. I think I'll play a snippet or 2 of some of them. I don't know if you recognize them all, but this might be familiar to you. Is that a tune people know? This is number 7 of the first set of 8. The other one's very famous from this first set is number 8. This one we've played a ton. So Dvorak and Simrock, they have a hit, right? That's great. Selling like hotcakes. And so Simrock, a few years later, comes back to and says, let's do it again. Let's write 8 more Slavonic dances that we can sell people. These are less popular. And, there's 8 years of compositional change. One thing that's important to note about Beethoven's folk song settings, nobody liked them. It didn't work. His publisher didn't make truckloads of money off of them. So it doesn't always result in a hit. But they're a little bit more, some of them are very audience friendly like that one, but some of them get a little bit strange. And I'm going to play you a bit of number 4, where it seems like it takes about 6 bars to actually find a key. This will be the end of the previous one. It's almost sort of creepy sounding. I honestly have no idea if this second set sold as well as the first one. For whatever reason, this was the end of the collaboration of these Flugelhorst to Slavonic dances. So it wasn't asked for 8 more, as far as I know. But what the difference to is that they're a little bit meatier. There's a little bit more going on. There's more to them. They're more complicated, and I think that's why I love them so much, especially this second set. And the very last one that he writes, number 16, number 8, is unlike any of the others in the set. And it's, in my humble opinion, fantastically beautiful. It's got a ton of rubato. It's not a fast piece, so it's not going to whip people up into a storm or anything like that. The tempo marking is very long. Lento e grazioso non troppo quasi tempo di waltz. So slow and graceful, but not too much like a waltz. Very little of this piece actually sounds like a waltz. It's in 3. The technical dance word for it, the Czech dance that it's based on, is a sesedzka, which is a slow couples dance in 3, or a moderate time couples dance in 3. The tempo is constantly varying, and it's also a very interestingly orchestrated version. The 2-piano version came first, but Dvorak made orchestral versions of all of them. In that it is, if it's not the only one, I think it's the only one that doesn't have trombones. It doesn't have timpani, which is actually pretty rare, especially since it does have a bell. So to have percussion but not timpani is something that you hardly ever do. So that kind of sound world is very different from the rest of them. And it's, I don't know, I have trouble talking about it in some ways, because it's a Dvorak Slavonic dance. It's supposed to be this kind of stupid, cute thing that people listen to for fun. And suddenly we get to the end of the set, the very last one, and you get this meaty, thick, intense, complicated thing that kind of defies a lot of expectations. Got 4 bars in, we already have 2 different tempos. And yes, it's in 3. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But you'd never think of that as a waltz. You'd never hear a waltz. Now we're going to get another stringendo here, quickening of the pace to a brick wall. Let's just say no human on earth could actually dance to this thing. Brick wall. And then we get a clarinet part that sounds suspiciously like the cuckoo from the Pastoral Symphony. One of the reasons I think Dvorak wrote such a complicated tempo marking is that he sort of had no idea how fast this should go. It's sort of constantly changing and it needs all that flexibility. And we'll just listen a little bit further so we can hear the bell, which is the best part. Given that it's 101, I will pause it there. Any questions?
What were
Yes.
Beethoven, the 1808 concert. There was one concert.
One very, very long
I
concert.
was just going to ask you, how long was it?
Yeah, we don't know for sure because he improvised for a while. But, you know, probably a good 4 hours.
And the heat was on, but the concert hall was broken or something.
Yeah, it was very cold.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact details, but of course, being 1808, they didn't probably have the greatest technology for that in the first place, December 22nd. There's no sense that it was an extremely successful event from a practical standpoint. We don't know. We don't have the receipts, but
What
it seems
specific role did he play in the concert?
well, everything. He kind of had to do it all by himself. You know. So obviously he wrote the music. That's number one. He would have played anything that had a piano. So the improvisation was by him. The piano concerto he would have played. The Choral Fantasy has a gigantic piano part. He would have played that as well. I guess I don't know for certain whether he would have led the orchestral pieces. He might have, just conducting them. He could play the violin, although he wasn't great at it. I mean, especially as you got more and more deaf, you can kind of fake it on the piano because you know where your fingers are. But there's some stories about him, for instance, picking up a violin and playing and not realizing that it was a half step off, things like that, just because he couldn't hear the instrument. But yeah, but like finding the musicians and coming up with the flyers and things like that, he would have had to have done that.
I don't know if it's true or not, and if it's this concert for sure, but that he was still writing it like at practice, and so the musicians didn't even have a very good practice because he wasn't done.
Yeah, which is sort of appalling to us today, not that uncommon for the time to do a piece without any rehearsal. But yeah, the choral fantasy in particular, apparently the ink was literally still wet on that piece.
What's up with the bases for him and Rose? Was that common? That they had it underhand? Yeah.
It's very German.
Oh.
So, the sort of old school bowing style, if you're playing like gamba or something, is to do that. And in the bass world, that's sort of lived on. It's called the German grip. And you need a special bow for it. It's wider. But then they have French grip, which is similar to what a cello would. In Vienna, they're definitely going to use a German grip. In the U.S., they sort of, I do one for myself. There are actually a few kind of interesting things instrumental-wise. Notice the horn players have rotary valves. Very common in German-speaking countries. Sorry, not rotary valves, but a different kind of rotary valve. Trumpets will use rotary valves in Germany. They won't do that here. Horns will use rotary valves here as well. But you notice they have four. Yeah, which is, horns, they'll have three, and then they'll have what they call a trigger, which puts the instrument into a different key. I guess I don't know if that fourth valve that they have acts that way, or if it acts like a fourth valve on a two-reed horn, which is just a standard valve of a different kind. Talk all about brass instrument manufacturing and things like that, but I probably shouldn't. More stuff? Thanks, guys. 6-7.